Wow, you're a great nurse.
Hi, Jane.
I love that background.
Oh, that's cool.
That is so cool. I love it. How'd you do that?
It's part of the Zoom choices.
Oh, really? Oh, cool. I didn't know they had that.
Did you hear about the woman who was leading a conference and she got stuck as a potato?
What?
No, I didn't hear. How did she get stuck as a potato?
Well, it's the same kind of thing you were using, but she didn't know how it got set that way and she didn't know how to change it. So she had to conduct the meeting as a talking potato.
I thought you were telling the start of a joke.
I know, right? Like 3 Buddhists walked into a bar, right?
Right. Yeah. Oh my gosh, that's so funny.
3 Buddhists walked into a Zoom meeting. They didn't know what they were doing.
So did you get to get some sun today?
Did I get to what?
Enjoy some sun.
I did. I went for a walk.
Nice.
In the streets. Not in the woods.
Were they empty?
Are they what?
Were they empty?
Were the streets empty? Yes.
Oh, good.
I just, well, I get to see my neighbors and I don't usually see them though. It's interesting. I see more people now than I did before, but there's not many.
Everybody's home. Yeah. I don't know why it keeps switching.
Hi, Ann.
Man.
You're muted. You're muted, Ann. Yep. Oh.
Almost.
There you go.
What is your background?
There's a setting in Zoom you can do to put virtual backgrounds.
No, you should say you just drove up to Alaska.
Yeah, I wish.
Decided to get away from all the craziness, right?
Yeah.
Chris, move your head.
I know.
Hair flies around.
They have other backgrounds, but they recommend this one if you don't have a green screen behind you.
Oh.
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 You got to get a green sheet and then them. I'm going to warn you ahead of time that the dogs are having cabin fever really bad. So, yeah, so there's going to be some of that.
Okay. I'm sure there will be here
too. Even Leanne is, getting all wired. They're having occasional zoomy attacks, and they just go crazy. And then that gets the other ones crazy, and then Leanne finally says enough, and it lasts about 10 minutes. and then it starts all over again. Um,
Tessie. Here, Tessie.
and likes to tease her.
I do. I was going to call you this morning to see if Leanne was all right because I dreamed about her last night.
Oh, yeah, no, she's fine.
Oh, good. Because in my dream, she and I were walking down some city street, and then she ran off with a pack of dogs, and all the other dogs came back except her.
Sounds like Leanne.
Oh dear.
I went to my house, which was my old house, and I didn't want to tell my husband, who's my ex-husband, about Leanne, but then I realized he didn't even own Leanne. But then when I opened the door, Dolly wanted to go out, and then Leanne came back without her collar, so everything was fine.
Sounds like a lot of freedom.
Well, maybe that's why Leanne is so energetic today, because she went on a trip.
She did.
So we got some people signing in. I'm sure maybe some people will trickle in as we go, but I've been doing a lot. No, stop. Trying to drink my tea. No. Here, you can have that. So a while back, I told you all that I discovered fairly, a few years ago that the practice that I learned in Korea was a Zen practice. In Korea, it's called Son. But that this practice also entailed two other kinds of practice. One being Pure Land practice and the other Huayan practice. And I knew a little bit about the Pure Land practice back then. And unfortunately, the general view of Pure Land practice in the West is negative. And so any kind of exploration into what Pure Land practice was, didn't leave me with the feeling that I wanted to explore very far. But then, probably about 3 or 4 years ago, I started learning a little more about it because I was teaching the chanting class at Buddha Dharma University. And in doing some reading about the different chants, I realized that, all this chanting to Amitabha and to all these other Buddhas and stuff is all Pure Land practice. And that got me, exploring. And Chris, did you take the Intro to Zen course?
Yeah, yes.
It's the book by Thich Thien An. That's where I first learned about Pure Land in a different way, because he talks about being Vietnamese. The Buddhism in Vietnamese is a combination of Pure Land and Zen. So that got me interested in exploring a little more. And the more that I've been exploring, the more that I am starting to realize that the West is really missing out on a really powerful aspect of Buddhist practice. And so I had thought about, let's do some, talks about this. And I'm thinking, okay, I'll put together a little presentation. We'll have, a talk, and then next week we can do one on somebody else, and next week. But I've spent the last 2 days putting together the stuff that I wanted to present. And I've realized that, I picked the shorter Amitabha Sutra, which is probably like 2 or 3 pages. And I filled this whole notebook with notes. So I realized that, okay, I think this is going to be a multi-meeting discussion, because I don't want it to go on for like 3 hours. And by the time we're done, we forgot what we started with. So I think it's better if we do it in little chunks. And that also gives time in between when we meet to digest some of what I'm presenting. And then you could come back with questions that we can explore together. So hopefully that sounds good to you. And with that, what I'm going to first do is introduce what Pure Land is, and then maybe start reading the sutra together and then just discussing it as we read it. And then we'll just see where we get to in about an hour, and then we can mark that as our leave off place and pick that up next week. This also, I'm sorry, go ahead.
What you have in here, what is Pure Land? Are these from your notes, or should we take notes?
I would take notes if you want to,
Okay.
Kind of digest it more.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, you don't have to, but I think it might help with kind of taking it in and letting it kind of sit, and then, coming back and having more dialogue. So the first part is what is Pure Land practice? Do any of you know what it is? Do you remember it from the course, Chris?
Not really, no. I'm just thinking it's something, is it more shamanic? It's more animal related to, no, okay.
No. This is what is interesting. It is, and this is what's so sad, because it is the most widely practiced, or the most widely form of Buddhism practiced in the world. And most Westerners don't even know anything about it. It's practiced primarily in China, Vietnam, Korea, Japan, and Mongolia. It's a form of Mahayana Buddhism, which is what Zen is part of. And it's a devotional practice. And it entails, the easy aspect to describe it is that it entails having faith in Sukhavati, which is the Western Pure Land, and the Buddha Amitabha, who presides in Sukhavati. And there are two primary ways to practice Pure Land. The first is that the Pure Land is an afterlife world where after death you're reborn into, and this world that you're reborn into is everything in it is conducive to you awakening and entering into parinirvana. The second form of the practice is a deeply personal practice in which one experiences Amitabha and the Pure Land in one's Buddha nature and in the present moment. The first form of practice is the one that's more commonly practiced by traditional cultures, and it tends to be the more popular form of the practice, because it entails primarily just reciting the Buddha's name, which that chant I was playing when some of you signed on, that was the chant that you would just chant over and over and over as much as you can throughout your life, with the hope that when you are dying, you are reciting that chant. And all of that, that effort will, it's sort of like investment in being reborn into Sukhavati, where then your life has no obstacles in being able to realize awakening.
Reborn into Savati.
It's S-U, S-U-H, no, I'm sorry, S-U-K-H-A-V-A-T-I, Sukhavati.
Prabhati. And that is the like Nirvana state?
No, it's preceding it. It's
Okay.
it's where you're born because you haven't completed your ability to awaken, you haven't realized parinirvana. And so when you're born in Sukhavati, everything there is conducive to you awakening and being able to go into parinirvana. Because in this life, you know, maybe your situation was too difficult and you didn't have the time or ability to devote to changing your mind into awakening and reaching parinirvana. So it's an afterlife world that precedes the ultimate end. You know, parinirvana is when we stop incarnating altogether. We no longer enter into the cycle of birth and death. We cease that experience.
Is that the same thing as Nirvana?
No, Nirvana is entering into the place of bliss, which is, you know, the unattachment to all of the desires. You know, nirvana means to quench or to put out. So nirvana is you've extinguished all the things that create desire and the stuff that gets you stuck. But you're still conditioned to enter into birth and death with nirvana. You have to take the next step, which is the ultimate quenching. That's what happened to the Buddha after he died, because he had reached nirvana, but he was still in the world.
Oh, okay.
And so you reach nirvana, and then when that body dies, you no longer come back. That's the original notion of it.
So when you talk
Yeah,
Sukhavati, does that mean rebirth as we come back to this world, only our circumstances are different, or it's a different realm?
It's described as a totally different world.
Okay.
Yeah. And Sukhavati is the name of that world.
Sukhavati.
Sukhavati. Like think S-U-K and then H-A-V-A-T-I. Sukhavati.
Is it premature to ask what that world is like?
Yeah, we'll get there.
Okay.
Yeah, first I want to kind of give you a little bit of background behind it. So the origins of Pure Land practice, where did this come from? So it was a Mahayana practice that emerged about 100 BCE, well, between 100 BCE and 100 CE. So that's like 1,000 years. The Buddha died in 486 BCE. So it came about after the Buddha. There are no surviving Indian texts of Pure Land teachings. All that's left are the Chinese translations of them. And the Pure Land practice arrived in China in 200 CE. So it was 200 years after, at least 200 years after the origin of Pure Land. There was a statue of Amitabha that was found in Mathura. That's a province of India that dates back to 104 CE. And so that indicates that there was a practice of Pure Land Buddhism in India before going elsewhere. There are several sutras associated with the teachings of Amitabha. The sutra on the land adorned with happiness, which is usually called the larger Sukhavituvaya Sutra, and the smaller sutra. they were composed in the northwest of India in a region called Prakrit around 100 CE. And Kumajiva, who's a pretty well-known Buddhist monk who he was associated with translating the Heart Sutra, translated the smaller sutra in 402 CE. So the name Pure Land is a Chinese term for Sukhavati. So Pure Land, Sukhavati, they're interchangeable. It's just Sukhavati is the Sanskrit. The Chinese just call that Pure Land. So here's Sukhavati. This is what you want to know. So Sukhavati is a world in the West, the direction of the West, that is free of obstructions to spiritual transformation. So free of any obstructions to awakening, and free of any obstructions to realize ultimate bliss. In that case, parinirvana. In Sukhavati, everyone there is tolerant, inclusive, accepting of anyone who follows the Buddha, no matter what level or stage in their own cultivation. And the way to be born is in Sukhavati is through devotional practices toward Amitabha, the Buddha, who created and presides over Sukhavati. So these devotional practices are reciting sutras that teach about Amitabha, chanting to Amitabha Buddha, meditating on the image of Amitabha Buddha, and a practice called recollecting the characteristics and qualities of the Buddha. So if a person is able to fix their mind onto one of those practices and open their heart to the Buddha and to Sukhavati in a full sense, then they will experience all the conditions necessary to be born in Sukhavati and be able to practice without obstruction to realize awakening. This is a practice that is similar to, in yoga terms, is I believe it's called Bhakti Yoga. I didn't double check that. But it's, there's different kinds of yoga practices, and they have different, different focus of practice. And I'm thinking Bhakti, but I have a feeling that's not correct. It begins with a B. That is devotional practice. And so you fill your heart with love to whatever deity that you've chosen to practice. And this is similar, which is probably, to me, makes sense that it originated in India, because it was probably mirrored off of that style of yoga. Because the emphasis on this feeling, this unending, enduring love for Amitabha. And so your mind is focused on the practice while you open your heart to the love of Amitabha. Someone's... the other thing that's interesting too is once you are born into Sukhavati, you can never regress in your practice. So no matter what level you arrive at, you will never fall behind in your efforts there. That's important for later. So the practice of Pure Land is basically utilizing other power or outside power to help the practitioner stay on their practice. The Avatamsaka Sutra, which is a major Mahayana sutra. That's, I think, only about 1,500 pages long. Teaches that the one contains the all. So if you are devoting yourself to Amitabha Buddha, you are actually devoting yourself to all Buddhas, including Shakyamuni Buddha, including Medicine Buddha. Any of all the Buddhas possess all other Buddhas. And so the Pure Land teaches that Amitabha Buddha is all Buddhas, and that all Buddhas are Amitabha Buddha. In the Pure Land, the mind becomes one point mind, and the heart is filled with Amitabha, the outer power. And once the mind is at one point and the heart is filled with Amitabha, then there ceases to be any difference between the object, which is Amitabha, and the subject, which is the practitioner. So that now they are one and the same thing, which is called one point samadhi. And that'll be important later too, because that's something we talk about in Zen practice. So in fact, one point samadhi is no different in Pure Land as it is in Zen. And what's interesting is that self-power, other power, outside power, inside power, these are also the same thing. And what happens is when somebody starts to practice in such a way that their mind is in one point on the practice and their heart is full of the love of Amitabha, then Amitabha and that person become one. So then outside power, inside power are one. And that's an important aspect to keep in mind as we talk about the practice of Pure Land today. So in Asia, Pure Land practice is mostly practiced by the elderly. And what happens is they become very focused on reciting the Buddha's name so that when they die, they can, be born in Pure Land. There's not a lot of younger people practicing it. And what I mean by practicing it is knowingly and intentionally practicing it. The truth is that actually almost every Buddhist practices some element of Pure Land. They just don't know they're doing it, like we've been doing. So the challenge for younger people and Western people, because in some case, the problem for younger people in the East is the same problem for people in the West, which is that most of this group are educated in the sciences. And because they're educated in the sciences, they're more suspicious of this notion of faith, because they oftentimes feel that any practice rooted in faith is contrary to what science teaches. And so they also, younger people and people in the West, tend to dismiss Pure Land as a superstitious practice, old-fashioned or naive. Also because a lot of people in Asia who practiced Pure Land from the time it was in China and as it spread were people who were poor, people who didn't have access to temples, people who worked, in many cases were indentured servants and didn't have the ability to go and listen to a Dharma talk or read sutras and all this stuff. So while the wealthy people and the noble class and all that stuff were, going to temples and learning from educated teachers and all this stuff, the poor people, the people in the rural areas were left with Pure Land practice, which is part of the reason why it was developed, because it was a way that Mahayana Buddhists wanted to be able to open the practice up to include more people. That's the definition of what Mahayana Buddhism is. It's, you know, it's called the greater vehicle. It's about, you know, getting as many people you can get on board so that we can all be delivered together. So those hurdles in regard to the science, faith, and, you know, superstitious folk traditions were kind of a hindrance for Buddhism, or Pure Land Buddhism, to kind of take on its younger and Western practitioners. But here's the thing that is interesting about Pure Land practice that I discovered, that contemporary Pure Land practice is all about being fully present. Because once you become fully present and you are free of the obstructions of your own mind, you already arrive at Sukhavati. If you are, the Pure Land practice is also a way for you to learn how to enjoy the life you have and to discover all the wonderful things that are existing in the life at this moment. You arrive at Sukhavati. When we are chanting together as a group, and the group is appreciating the chanting together and it's supporting the path of practice, cultivating harmony, skillfulness, and truth, you arrive at Sukhavati. So this is what's so interesting, that when we deliver ourselves to the Pure Land goes wherever we go. So that we can be in a busy city, in a slum of, you know, some big place, a busy train station. If we are cultivating the qualities that the Pure Land practice is, you know, meant to cultivate, then we carry the Pure Land with us anytime and everywhere we go. We are benefiting from carrying the Pure Land, and those who come in contact with us are also benefiting. So we'll talk more when we actually start talking about the sutra, but basically, if we go back to the idea that there's other power and, you know, self power and outside power, inside power, but we also know that those are just the same thing, then Sukhavati isn't in the West. Sukhavati is right here. And all we have to do to arrive at Sukhavati is, we don't have to die. We have to just let go of all of the delusions that keep us from realizing that. And this is the brilliance of this sutra that I just discovered. And I feel so compelled to share, because it's actually pretty awesome, especially in relation to what we're all experiencing right now in this world. So the other interesting thing is that all of the faith traditions have a Pure Land. Hinduism has Amaravati, which is Indra's immortal realm. There's Brahmaloka and Brahmavira. Those are both the world's, it's kind of the abode of Brahma. Judaism and Christianity have heaven, or the kingdom of God. They also have the Garden of Eden. And Islam has Eden, also has the gardens of delight that dwell close to Allah. So Pure Land practice is actually accessible to everybody of all faith traditions. It doesn't matter your age, it doesn't matter your background, it doesn't matter your level of practice, it doesn't even matter what faith you are. Daily recitation is what you work towards, because every recitation that you do is investment in arriving in the Pure Land. And the practices, the specific practices are designed to develop mindfulness and concentration. And you'll hear people of other faith traditions. I hear this all the time with Christians that heaven or the kingdom of God is right here, right now, right? We've heard that. So this is the same methodology. So we have the shorter Amitabha Sutra. That's the one we're going to explore. And this is the teaching of Shakyamuni Buddha teaching the disciples about Amitabha and Sukhavati. And there are a whole bunch of different kinds of commentary. And I've been reading some other ones, but I didn't want to go too much into those before I kind of went through the sutra in the more contemporary understanding, which is that the nature of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas are here to help us in this moment, that it's not about a deferred like a deferred result. It's about right here, right now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put up the sutra so we can see it together. Oh yeah, I guess I have to do the screen share first. Okay. Can everybody see that?
Yep.
No?
Yes.
Yes. Yes, everybody?
Yes.
Okay. So why don't we, oh, shoot, I don't want this one. I want a different one. I broke them up into sections. There, yeah, that's the one. Okay. So why don't we have somebody read section 1?
Why don't you read section 1 with all the hard words?
Okay.
I agree. Yes.
Good point.
Yeah, you're showing a lot of experience there.
Okay. I'm not some of these I can do. Okay, so thus I have heard, once Buddha was in the land of Shravasti in the garden of Jeta and Anathapindika. He was accompanied by 1,250 great bhikshus, all of them great arhats, well known to the assembly. Among them were his leading disciples, such figures as the elders Shariputra, Magdalgayana, Mahakashyapa, Mahakatyayana, and Mahakastilya. Ravata, Sudha, Pantaka, Nanda, Ananda, Rahula, that's the Buddha's son, Gadyampati, Pindola, Bharadvaja, Kalu, Dayan, Maha, Kapina, Vakula, Aniruddha, etc. All the great disciples. Could have done that like after the third one. All present were the Bodhisattvas, Mahasattva, Manjushri, Prince of the Dharma, the Bodhisattva Ajita, the Invincible, and the Bodhisattva of Constant Progress, Gandhastan Nitya Yukta, and other such great enlightened beings. Also present was Shakra, the king of the gods, along with countless numbers of heavenly beings making up a great assembly. It's important to always kind of pay attention to who's listed as present, because it gives you a little bit of information about where this happened in the Buddha's lifetime. And if we see that Rahula was present, then that means that his son has to be an adult and has ordained as a monk. And so that gives you an idea that, probably this was given maybe like 20 years into the Buddha's teaching. So he would be about in his 60s at the earliest, probably. So he's been teaching for a while.
Is Chakra, the king of the gods, a real person, or is it kind of like a Roman god or a Greek god that's?
Yeah, it's the Hindu have many different gods, and being part of that culture, even in the Buddha's awakening story, Brahma is present. That's the god. That's the ultimate god. That's Brahma is the god that all other gods come from, and so there is often acknowledgement of different gods that might be an attendant to the talks that the Buddha give, and it has a significance in the sense that there was an emphasis on the qualities that God might represent being there. So in this case, the king of the gods, is significant in that it's, pretty high up on the pantheon of gods, which means this is an important teaching. So we always want to look, there's a tendency for us to kind of skip over that first paragraph because there's all these names. But it's important to pay attention because there is a reason why they're listed. And it's like for these reasons that we described. So,
is it kind of a respect thing too?
Of course, yeah.
But that people, well, to also attract people to the Buddhist teachings when they might still be in the Hindu teachings? I mean, to try to get them away from that or incorporate that in the teachings?
I think it's more of incorporation, yeah. Because Buddhism isn't and never was a proselytizing practice. So it wasn't about converting people. It was about teaching people a practice that they could adopt in their lives. It wasn't until many, many years, 1,000 years, more than 1,000 years after the Buddha died, that there was even a thing called Buddhism. So
okay.
In a lot of ways, the Buddha in his lifetime was looked at as somebody who, refined Hinduism. And so kind of like the way that you might think of as Protestants coming from Catholicism.
Well, I'm glad you said that about not even being Buddhism, because it makes a lot of sense then why all these other gods and people are there. That
it was part of the culture.
Yeah.
And the Buddha himself grew up with, all of these influences. He didn't grow up in the Brahmic tradition, which is, was the predominant form. I mean, we say Hinduism wasn't really around when the Buddha was alive. It was like the early formation of Hinduism. But the Vedic tradition, which the Hindus practice emerged from, was the predominant belief. And there were all different kinds of ways to practice Vedic tradition. So all of that was an influence everywhere that he went. Shakyamuni or Siddhartha Gautama came from a region where Brahmic religion wasn't practiced. The Brahmic religion was that you had this, the the highest class, there were all the priests, and they were in charge of everybody's spiritual life. And so you would pay Brahmins to do prayers for you. You know, if you needed someone healed, you would pay the Brahmin. They would do all the ceremonies and stuff to the gods to ensure that. The Buddha didn't grow up in that. He grew up more animist relation to gods, where, you know, everything was a living God, and there's you know, kind of scholarship to show that Shakya, the clan that he was part of, was sun. So they worshipped sun god, and so their, you know, gods and everything were more attributed to nature and stuff like that. They didn't do the caste system and all that kind of stuff. He encountered that when he traveled into India, and so he wasn't about, you know, converting people to his way. He was more about opening up people to a different way of relating to the world. Now, he was very critical of a lot of the culture's practices. He was very critical of the caste system, and he was very critical of the Brahmanic priests, because at this point in the culture, people were becoming very disillusioned by the Brahmanic priests, because they were all rich. People were, you know, poor and struggling, and the Brahmin class got richer and richer, and people were finding that, you know, we keep paying them to, you know, get us out of poverty and all this stuff, and we're still poor as ever. And so, you know, the question of whether the Brahmins were actually helping was very ripe in the culture at the time. So he picked up on that, and that's why one of his most famous teachings, called the Fire Sermon, was all about the critique of the Brahmin priests. And there were like thousands of Brahmin priests at that talk. So it was totally intentional that he lambasted their practices, because he saw that they were frauds. And so all of those things are important, because they are kind of packed into that first paragraph in any of his sutras. Where he was and who was there was always important, because it give you, you know, if you're somebody who's studying all of these early scriptures, these are the clues that kind of help you figure out the chronology and all this stuff. And then when you start seeing all those put together, you really start to get a really good idea of where the Buddha traveled, how long it took, where he was, all of this kind of stuff. And so this is one of those examples of that. So the next is, at that time, Buddha said to elder Shariputra, west of here, past 100 billion Buddha lands, there exists a world called ultimate bliss. In this land, there exists a Buddha called Amitabha, who is expounding the Dharma right now. So we all know who Shariputra is, right? Where do we remember hearing about Shariputra?
The Heart Sutra.
Right. That's who's being taught the Heart Sutra, is Shariputra. And what's interesting here too is that the early paragraphs of the sutra are almost always containing the entire sutra. One of the brilliance of the Diamond Sutra is that this whole long sutra, that if you read, is like some kind of weird mind trip. The second or third paragraph is the entire teaching of the Diamond Sutra in 3 sentences. And it's almost always described by him performing an action. So the action is the Buddha's teaching. So here's the Buddha sitting, and he speaks to Shariputra. Another thing that's interesting about the sutra is this is one of the sutras. There are sutras where the disciple asks the Buddha a question, and then that begins the discourse. Then there are times where no one asks the question, and the Buddha presents the teaching. So this is this kind of sutra. No one's asking him a question. He's guiding the teaching. So here he is, sits before Shariputra and says, in the West, there is this place called ultimate bliss. And in this land is this Amitabha who is expounding the Dharma right now. So we can go on and read the rest of the sutra, and it will explain the teaching that is right there. But we can already divine from this teaching that this land that he's talking to exists right where he is. Because Amitabha is speaking now. And if we already understand that all Buddhas are the same Buddha, then the Buddha that's teaching about Amitabha, who is teaching right now, is Amitabha Buddha. And the West is the only reason that he says the West is because that's the direction he's facing. If he had been facing the East, he would have said in the East, there is this place. And the Buddha's teaching right now. So we'll explore kind of more of that, but keep that in mind because what follows is going to be a lot of mind traps. And this is one of the reasons why a lot of the Buddhist sutras are not followed in the West, because people don't know how to read the sutras. And when we read the sutras, especially these sutras that go on to describe these very fantasy-like things, are meant to be read with the heart, not the intellect. So what we're moving into is the kind of speak that communicates to the mind before thinking. So all that's followed is in some ways like kangans. They're supposed to cut through the conceptual thinking and meet you right with reality, just as it is. Does that make sense?
Well, is he saying that when he's pointing to the West, you said he could be pointing any place, but is there a real Buddha called Amitabha, or did he just make up that name because it could be anybody teaching it?
Well, if Amitabha Buddha is all Buddhas, then yeah,
Okay, I get it.
Maybe it is made up, but does it matter? Because all Buddhas are the same Buddha.
Okay.
Right.
So
Did
he
that
does.
word. I'm sorry, Ann.
No, well, I guess I was probably going to say the same thing. Is so he doesn't he knows there's somebody teaching the Dharma, but it doesn't necessarily have to be anyone he knows.
You missed the point like by 1,000 miles. If the Buddha is giving a talk,
Yeah.
and if we already know, because this had already been taught, that all Buddhas are Amitabha Buddha, and Amitabha Buddha are all Buddhas, and the Buddha that is sitting before you is saying that Amitabha is teaching the Dharma right now, then what does that mean?
All Buddhas are teaching the Dharma right now.
Right, the Buddha that's right in front of you giving the teaching is giving you a lesson in the Dharma right this moment. So this land that exists, 100 billion Buddha lands away is just a analogy. And this is where the whole idea of upaya comes in. Upaya means skillful means. And skillful means that when you become someone who teaches, it's important to learn upaya, meaning that you have to teach the Dharma in accordance to who you're teaching to. And so you can't teach some high, complex, theoretical approach to the Dharma if you are presenting your teaching to a bunch of newcomers or people who are new on the path or who aren't familiar with a lot of the Buddha terms and things like that. So this is the case where if we give you this little toy of your mind to say that there's this land in the West that is full of bliss, and there's this Buddha who teaches the Dharma there, wow, I want to get there. So now we want to listen to what he's going to tell us about the Dharma. So this is just skillful means, because we all know enough from the Buddha's teaching that he's not going to go around and teach us all how to be, using our imagination to think of being in fantasy worlds and not know how to live in this life. None of the Buddha's teachings has anything to do with that. It's always about being fully here. So this whole idea of, okay, there's this place in the West, a billion Buddha worlds away, that's called ultimate bliss. There's this place. It's like the opening of a story, right? A long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, right? It's the same thing. It's the hook that gets you to go, ooh, I want to hear about this. Make sense?
Yes.
So the next part says, Buddha says to Shariputra, why is this land called ultimate bliss? It's called ultimate bliss because the sentient beings in this land are free from the myriad sufferings and only know every kind of joy. Okay, so again, wow, this sounds like the kind of place I want to know. How do we get there, Buddha? Right?
Yep.
Who wants to read the next part?
All
Sure.
right. Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, Jane.
Oh, okay. Furthermore, this land is called ultimate bliss because it is surrounded by 7 rings of railings and 7 layers of nets and 7 rows of trees, all made of the 4 precious jewels. Do you want me to continue? Or
Yeah.
Okay.
Read all the way to 3 there.
Okay. Moreover, the land of ultimate bliss has many jeweled ponds filled with the waters of 8 virtues. The bottom of each pond is pure gold sand, and the stepped walkways that lead up from all 4 sides of each of the ponds are made of gold, silver, lapis lazuli, and crystal. Above the ponds, there are towers which are adorned with silver and gold and lapis lazuli and crystal and mother of pearl and red agate. In the ponds, there are lotus flowers as big as cartwheels, blue ones shining with blue light, yellow ones shining with yellow light, red ones shining with red light, and white ones shining with white light, each emitting a subtle, pure fragrance. The land of ultimate bliss is complete with all these merits and adornments.
Okay, so sounds like really pretty place, right? All
Yep.
these jewels and gold and crystals and colors and fragrance. Now, we know that the Buddha, because he's the Buddha, doesn't lie. So how can he be talking about this place and not be lying?
Well, what do these things symbolize? You know, what are the 8 virtues and
Oh, okay, good question. The waters of 8 virtues are this water that um, it, it quenches all thirst, and it's basically kind of like clears your mind to being fully engaged in the practice. So it's not a literal water. It's basically like, you know, the kind of practice you do that quenches your mind like water that would quench your thirst.
would it be like virtues like generosity, skillfulness, wisdom, that kind of thing? Or
They would probably include the 6 paramitas, which are the 6 virtues, and there's probably some other higher level virtues that are included in that.
is that what that would be referencing?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. So go ahead.
I was going to say the first paragraph, it when Jane was reading it, it just to me meant that it was a place that was safe because it was surrounded by all these things. But
Wow, that's a really good insight, Anne.
Well, you asked about why he wasn't lying, because, well, I was thinking because this is what he saw in his mind, and maybe everybody else saw something different.
Close, I think. One, that is a great insight into the whole idea of, you know, the sense of security, because that's what he's setting up is, you know, here's this place where you're safe. But then looking at the description in the next paragraph, you know, we got these jeweled ponds and gold sand and, you know, all this kind of beautiful jewelry and all this stuff. Now, we know that the Buddha and all of the disciples and stuff have no interest in jewels and money. So how might you see that this description applies to reality just as it is?
Because we right now have everything we need.
Yes, and when you can see that, then what you see are diamonds on the leaves of grass in the morning dew. Mm-hmm. And the spider web is adorned with crystals, and the pond has gold in its waves, because your transformation is in the transformation of how you perceive the world. And so he's describing the world he sees right now. Mm-hmm. We're still using the upaya, the skillful means of, you know, telling these new people that, you know, here's a place to strive for. Here's a place that if you practice, you can endeavor to reach. Because that's more appealing than if we say, if you work real hard and practice real hard, then the pond will be, you know, covered with jewels, and the spider web will be diamonds, and most people will just be like, okay, weirdo, right? Because how can that be possible when I live in, you know, a slum? So he's offering a way for someone to look outside of their situation, so that then later, with practice, they can see their own situation as it is, not how they think it should be or shouldn't be, and so on. Make sense?
Yep.
Okay, who wants to read the 3rd section?
Sure.
Go ahead, Chris.
And there's more. Celestial music is constantly playing in this Buddha land, and the ground is made of tawny gold. Flowers in the shape of heavenly orbs rain down at all hours of the day and night. Every morning, the sentient beings of this land decorate their garments with a multitude of wondrous flowers. and make offerings to hundreds of billions of Buddhas in other worlds. When it is mealtime, they return to their own land to eat and circumambulate the teaching assembly. The land of ultimate bliss is complete with all these merits and adornments. And there is more still. In this land, there are birds of all sorts of wondrous, variegated colors, white cranes, peacocks, orioles, myna birds, cuckoos, and all these birds bring forth harmonious song day and night. Their songs communicate such Buddhist teachings as the 5 roots, the 5 powers, the 7 factors of awakening, the Eightfold Path, as well as other teachings. When the sentient beings in this land hear the voices of the birds, they are mindful of the Buddhas, they are mindful of the Buddhas, mindful of the Dharma, and mindful of the Sangha. Do not think that these birds were born as birds due to karmic retribution for past misdeeds. Why not? In this Buddha land, the 3 evil planes of existence, as animals, hungry ghosts, and hell beings, do not exist. In this Buddha land, even the names of the evil planes of existence do not exist, much less the realities. All these birds are the creation of Amitabha Buddha, fashioned in order to broadcast the sounds of the Dharma.
Okay. So again, we've got these descriptions of, beautiful descriptions, these sentient beings who, wear all these beautiful flowers and they make offerings to Buddhas. And when they go to mealtime, they return to their own land and then they eat and then they do walking meditation. But, it's like, wow, this is like a great place full of people who practice harmoniously. And I love how he like kind of describes it, because he's like a salesman, right? He's like, and there's more, because
It was in advertising.
yeah, right. And there's more still, because now we also have all these wonderful birds, and all these birds he describes, these are birds common in India. So again, he's basically describing the world right where they are. But if you're a beginner and you're not sure of your practice, you're going to see this as, oh, wow, this place is so amazing. I want to make sure I practice really hard because I want to get there. And one of the things I love about the sutra, I think it speaks kind of to my own heart, because I've always felt that nature teaches me more about living than any books that I have read. Most of my, real profound moments of insight come from my interaction with nature. And here is the Buddha telling us that birds teach us all the Buddhist teachings. They teach us about the 5 roots being, our 5 senses, and the 5 powers being the energy of the senses, and the 7 factors of awakening are one of his early sutras. And clearly we've got, the Eightfold Path. The birds are teaching this. And so what he's saying is that, if you want to learn all these things, go outside, listen to the birds. And to me, this is how Zen, how much more Zen can you get, right? This is a Zen teaching right there.
When he's taught, can you have it go?
What are you doing, Anne?
I'm trying to see the top of it.
You want the text?
Yes.
Oh, you're trying to move it?
When he's talking about the beginning, how, people are walking around and they're doing walking meditation and they're eating. Is he describing a Sangha?
Yes. Oh my God, you are on a roll tonight. Yes. Because one of the big elements about this sutra is that he's also talking about that the Sangha is a pure land. And that in our practice, if we are cultivating the Sangha correctly, then we are creating the Pure Land. And you know, one of the reasons why I got so excited about you know, talking about this is because this is yet again another thing that has come up that has been calling me since the beginning of the year, in that idea that we've got to really talk about the importance of Sangha and why we need it and why it's important for us to cultivate it and nurture it. And, you know, and yet again, there's this thing that just kind of appeared in the right time and right place that is also teaching about the importance of Sangha and why Sangha is our Pure Land right here, right now. And we'll see that more and more as we progress in the sutra, because it really comes down to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha are what make our practice true. So great insight there. Wonderful. So can any of you relate to this idea that, you know, flowers can create this beautiful atmosphere, and birds can teach the Dharma, and that this paragraph, do not think that these birds were born as birds because of karmic retribution. Just means, you know, the result of past causes and conditions. That they, and also why he's signifying that, because you know, the idea in rebirth is that if you are practicing and cultivating merit, that that will ensure that you will be reborn in a higher consciousness. And animals are considered, like the lower realms are animal realm, hell realm, and hungry ghost realm. And so he's saying here that, you know, don't think that the birds are here because they didn't do enough good action and they were reborn as birds, you know, being in the animal realm. Because he's saying that, guess what? Those three realms, they don't even exist. So, you know, he's saying that while you may be working towards rebirth and all that kind of stuff, well, I'm going to tell you, guess what? Those are fake. That's made up by your mind. And if you believe that in your mind, then maybe you will enter into those realms. But I'm here to tell you that those realms don't even exist. You know, this is why the Buddha was a radical, because he's telling people that all of the stuff that you believe and that you put all this energy into and all the stuff that's so important, it's nonsense. It's all made up by your mind. So in the next paragraph, he's saying that even these evil planes of existence, they don't even exist.
Much less the realities. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. The only reality is the one that you are experiencing right now.
And even that's only in our mind.
Right. Right.
It's really on our screen, Chris.
Yeah.
So let's just do this. Let's just
There's your reality. Popping in and out of reality.
Do that again. Because your head goes right into your shoulder. It's pretty neat.
Um, I'm just checking my notes here.
Is there anybody here else besides us?
There are Michael, Yunsan, Beth, and Beth, from yoga.
Okay.
Everybody say hi. Michael Irving, Courtney
They can
Bach.
see me being goofy.
They
I don't
can.
know. I don't know if they can. Well, maybe now that.
Okay, I'll be good now.
Michael, Sangha member Michael, they're watching. So. There's an important element here that I think I will save for the next time. Called the there's a whole teaching of the Buddhist Trinity. It's called the Trikaya, and it's called the three bodies of Buddha. And the three bodies are Dharmakaya, Sambhogakaya, and Nirmanakaya. And they are different ways of conceiving of the Buddha and how we relate to the Buddha. But that's kind of a lengthy thing. It's worth going over, but I think I want to save it. We can start with that next time. Let's see. The whole thing about the results of past action. This is the last paragraph there. Also what's going on here is he's teaching about the relative world and the absolute world. And so what he's teaching are, both at the same time. And so in the historical dimension, or we call relative world, birds, flowers, clouds, all of that exists. They're all part of the cycle of living and dying. But in the Dharmakaya, in what we call the physical body of Buddha, all of these things are just manifestations of Dharma, or what we call phenomena. We think of Dharma as the teachings, but the word Dharma predated the notion of Dharma meaning teachings, because Dharma also just means things, phenomenal things that are comprised of elements. So birds are Dharma, our bodies are Dharma. All of those things are Dharma. Thoughts are Dharma because they're, you have to have a brain to have a thought. And so any comprised things or compounded things are Dharma. In the karmic view, everything is manifested because of causes and conditions before it. So if we are talking about birds, which is why he's saying, these birds aren't here because they did all these bad things and they have been born in this world as a lesser being. He's explaining that the birds in Sukhavati are created because of wonderful things, because of all of the great, wonderful merits of life and all the conditions in Sukhavati that make things possible there. So what he's really saying is that we don't have to be so concerned about before. Really, we should just be concerned about what we're doing now. And so I think in a lot of ways, what this sutra is teaching is kind of like, hey, I've got this good news that I want to share you, but it's going to challenge like all of the things that you've believed before. So I have to present it in a way that kind of lowers your defenses a little bit, and you can pay attention to the good news. And then later, maybe as you begin to practice, you start to kind of, they come together and go, huh, maybe this belief isn't really necessary or isn't really contributing to, all that I have right here, right now. So in this case, he's talking about the birds. They're there because Amitabha brought them, and so that everything they offer is the teaching of the Dharma. That's what creation can be for us. Didn't we talk about this on Sunday, right? Like how even the most unpleasant person at times can be a Buddha appearing to teach us. Mm-hmm. It's just a matter of how do we choose to perceive the world? Do we choose to perceive the world that all of creation is working towards this harmony and better realization, or do we view the world as an obstacle to all that? Does that make sense? Everybody's quiet.
Yes. Is he also saying that birds and us and all the animals are, one is as important as the other, that we're all sentient beings?
I think so, yeah, because he's saying that they're not there because of karmic cost.
Okay.
Which would put into our mind this idea that, animals are lower, so they've got more stuff to work off than humans who are higher. And he's kind of negating that there.
Okay.
Because that attitude is what prevents us from learning the Dharma from a robin singing outside our window, right? If we believe that, animals are lesser than us, then why would we want to listen to the song of a robin? I mean, what could they possibly teach us, right? And the Buddha's saying, don't do that. Because that robin song, that's the Eightfold Path being taught to you right now. If only you'd listen. But at least you can die and go to Sukhavati and get the lesson. There's always that as the backup.
Ah.
Okay, let's just read the fourth one and then we'll stop at that place.
Okay.
In
this Buddha land, there is a slight breeze that stirs the rows of jewel trees and jewel nets so that they emit subtle, wondrous sounds, like hundreds and thousands of melodies playing all at once. All those who hear these sounds spontaneously develop the intention to be mindful of the Buddha, mindful of the Dharma, and mindful of the Sangha. The Buddha land is complete with all these merits and adornments.
Tessie just slid down the back of the chair between me and my back. The back and just stayed there.
Warm spot.
I guess. Okay, so any thoughts on that?
Throughout it, it sounds like he's trying to touch upon all the senses.
Yeah, that's a good one. So there's a term that a lot of the people present would probably know, and that is Saha world. Saha world is this world that we're in that is, the world of suffering. That's the Saha world. And so in the Pure Land, the Pure Land is the opposite of the Saha world. It's, it's pure. Everything there is, wonderful and beautiful and teaching the Dharma, and, everything just is perfect for all of that self-cultivation. And yet he's teaching this notion that the Pure Land exists right here, right now. So how can the Pure Land exist in the same place as the Saha world?
Well, it's because of what you said before. It depends how we look at things.
Right.
But it also what Jane just said about the senses, that maybe some people will grasp this better by seeing it, others by hearing it, in that there's kind of a choice, not a choice, but you're giving everything, all your senses can get your attention, but everybody has a different way of perceiving things. Some people through music, some people through looking. And I
34,000 Dharma doors.
Yeah.
Right. Because we covered sight, we covered smell, we did sound. And so all of these are, like you said, these are the doorways into the Dharma. And what does it all accumulate to at the end, which is mindfulness of what?
now, here and now.
But what in the here and now are we mindful of?
Well, it says the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha.
Right.
Well, it's the awakening.
I'm sorry, what?
It's the awakening to that, to the awakening to what's in the present moment.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like, because it says here too, spontaneously develop the intention to be mindful of the Buddha. So it's even that this teaching is so profound and subtle that you start doing the practice all by itself. Just by listening to what you listen, smell what you smell, see what you see. All of that is being mindful of the Dharma Sangha. Let's see if I what my notes have here. So the other thing too that's interesting, and I think it gets a little bit more explained further on, but if we pay attention to the fact that the Saha world and Pure Land exist in the same place, and that it's just a matter of how we view things, then how do we resolve the problem that may seem to be appearing, which is that if the Pure Land is pure, which means that everything in it is conducive to becoming awakening, then how can someone who's in Sukhavati learn how to transcend suffering if there's no suffering there?
By helping they wouldn't be able to help others because everyone is in the same place there.
Right. So what I think that indicates is that the Pure Land has suffering in it. Because how do you know if you're not suffering if you've never experienced suffering, right? If you never feel hunger, then how would you ever know that you liked food?
Is it sort of like the two sides of the same coin kind of concept?
If you mean by shunyata, sort of, I think it's more pointing to the idea that pure and impure are not what we're thinking they are. Because what we usually think of a place as pure, then it must not have impurity in it, right? I mean, if it's all pure, right? Mm-hmm. But if we know that the Buddha is not trying to sell us a fantasy, even though he's kind of describing one, then he would know that in order for us to be able to free ourselves from suffering, look at the Four Noble Truths. In order to get to the place of the third noble truth, which is that there is a way out of suffering, well, the only way we know how to get out of suffering is to know the suffering we're in, right? The first two noble truths are there is suffering, and there is a way to end suffering. We have to know those things. And the third noble truth is there is a way to transcend suffering. And the fourth noble truth is the path, the Eightfold Path is the path to avoid suffering. So we have to be careful about the word pure, because in this case, pure is not about opposites. Pure is about the idea that in Sukhavati, you have all of the conditions available and the teachings available to you to learn how to transcend suffering. And so this world, the Saha world and the pure world are the same world. It's just that in the Pure Land, we know how to take the suffering that is in this world and transform it.
That makes sense, because when we first started, we agreed that the Buddha was talking about being right here, right now.
Mm-hmm.
So the suffering exists right here, right now.
Right.
So what you just said, though, we have all the tools to either look at everything and suffer from it, or look at it a different way. But
yeah.
we're in the same place.
Recognize that, oh, I am caught in this suffering, rabbit or hamster wheel. Yeah. And maybe if I set my intentions in a different way, that I'm no longer caught in that. But it was knowing that I was caught that was what helped me to get out of it. You can't, it's like, when someone who's has an addiction, they can't free themselves from the addiction if they don't first acknowledge that they have an addiction, right? You can't just go, oh, I'm gonna quit smoking, or I'm gonna quit doing drugs. Well, that then means that they've acknowledged that they're doing them, right?
Yeah.
You can't, it's, I deal with it with my dad all the time with, like eating sugar. He doesn't want to acknowledge that, his diabetes means that he has to, not eat sugar, but he doesn't want to acknowledge that. And then by not acknowledging that, he's like, why is my diabetes so bad? It's like, it's like, well, if you look at what you're actually doing, that would make sense. But he doesn't want to do that because he doesn't want to give up the sugar.
So
we all do that to some degree. And what the Buddha is pointing out is that we can use all of that suffering in a way that propels us into the Pure Land, if we choose to do that. I think also, go ahead, Anne.
Well, do you think we do that with some things and not other things?
Yeah, everybody has their trap.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Some, worse than others, some more than others. It's all different. And it all comes back to, the causes and conditions that affect our lives. If we just accept the causes and conditions, then we fall into kind of this belief in destiny, right? Because what can I do? It's all the stuff that happened before that put me in this path. When we were in Bar Harbor last fall, Venerable Wanji talked a lot about this whole idea that, everything's already determined. And so you could think, oh God, everything's determined. So I have no choice in my life. Everything's just already laid out. Well, yeah, that's like the Saha world to explain it. But the Pure Land way to explain it is like, wow, so since everything's already determined, then, and I have no choice, then I can transcend all that altogether, and I have all choice available to me right now. I can change my entire life right this moment because I've freed myself from the trap of I'm stuck with this. It's the difference between kind of seeing the narrow view versus the wide view, right? If we get locked into this is the narrow view, then there's not a whole lot of choice in here. We're stuck with it. But if we change to this, it's like, wow, yeah, cause and conditions got me here, but look at all of this breathing room I have. I can make all the choices that are available to me right this moment and completely change my whole life. We can all do that. Are we brave enough to do it? That's the question.
I have a question.
Yeah.
A lot of times with these kinds of things, I tend to imagine extremes. And for example, if someone who's trapped in a dungeon, how does this teaching help them?
Yeah, that's a good question, right? One of the best things, we have a great living, well, formerly living example of that very situation. Mandela. He was imprisoned for, was it 27 years or 37 years? I think it was 27. In a cell that was like 6 foot by 4 foot, something like that. And he came out of that cell more empowered than he was when he was put in. How is that possible, right? Well, clearly he was able to transcend the limitations of that space that the, the mind conditioned by suffering and all that stuff would have created, which probably would have meant that he probably wouldn't even survived the 27 years. He not only survived the 27 years, came out stronger and became president of the very country that imprisoned him. That only is possible if you are in the Pure Land. So how to do that, I can't tell you. But what I can say is that clearly it's possible. It's a matter of, do you choose to do it? Sometimes we get put in these situations and we're stubborn and we just want everybody else to get us out of it. And we rail at the world and we find all of the reasons to blame everything else and everyone else, and we just stay stuck there.
The sutra is telling us how to do that further up and by the Eightfold Path and the virtues and the paramitas. It's explained to us how we can get to Pure Land.
Yeah, and the other thing, that a lot of people, this is kind of, I think, why the Pure Land practice developed as a Buddhist practice, was because there were a lot of people who were in horrible situations. I mean, as awful as our situation is, go back 1,000 years and, people's lives could be downright miserable. And so this ability to just recite the name of Amitabha Buddha, while you're toiling in the fields, while, you're being beaten and, starving, reciting this name over and over is like the one little piece of light, the jewel in your life that you can cling to help get you through in a situation where there probably is just nothing you can do to literally change that. And so there is an economy to the practice too, that when you're really stuck, when you feel like there's just nowhere else to go, you can lose yourself completely into this this part of the practice. And even if you don't believe in rebirth, there is a part of you that in Buddhism we understand that our bodies are what end, but there's something else that continues. And that cultivation can help us to reach a better place after this. Because there are just times where there is just nothing we can do about the situation we're in. And the Buddha isn't saying, well, if you identify, he didn't go and teach like the 10 conditions of life that are like no hope for you. He didn't teach that because he understood that there's no such thing. There are certainly situations in people's lives that are awful and terrible. And maybe we can't exert anything in the physical world to change that. But we can give ourselves this jewel that we can pour everything we have into to just give us that moment of peace until things change, because eventually they will, whether we die or the jailer frees us, or whatever it might be. And if we're cultivating that, and this is what Mandala did, was he prayed all the time in that cell, and that prayer, that constant cultivation, is what allowed him to endure, and not only endure, but then when he was freed, became president. That's the gift of that kind of practice. And it's why I feel it's unfortunate that in the West, we kind of diminish and ridicule that. Because if you understand it in the way that the Buddha presented it, in a lot of ways, it's the most powerful form of practice than any of the other kinds of practices. Because it is where, even though we tend to think we're going and reaching for outside power to help us, the truth is that the power comes from within us, and we transform ourselves in that practice. And I see, more and more the potentiality of our condition to become more challenging in the near future, and where the idea of just kind of having this separate space to cultivate ourselves may become more challenging for a lot of people. And so being able to deliver this teaching that if you feel like the space for your practice has gotten smaller, well, here's something you can do to help continue to cultivate yourself without thinking like I've lost everything. What's interesting to me is, and why I'm really excited about kind of rediscovering this, is Thich Nhat Hanh describes in one situation where you're someone who's your practice has called to you to build a practice center. So you put all this time and effort into creating a space where people can come and practice, and that's wonderful. That's the call that this practice cultivated. But in the process of you maintaining and doing all of the work that's involved in keeping a practice center running, you start to lose the space for the time that you used to cultivate that got you to go and do that in the first place. And if you don't realize that you're losing that, then the energy starts to change, because you're no longer connected to all of that positive energy that led you into creating that space. So then, then it's like jealousy and fear and anxiety, and all those things start to creep back in, and that starts to taint the energy of the center that you're practicing. So what is the solution? To go, oh, well, I gotta like sell it and give it to somebody else because I gotta go, recultivate myself. No, he says the answer is do the Pure Land practice, do the recitation, do the chanting while you're doing your taxes for the building, and do the recitation while you're, putting together a marketing package, do all of that stuff, because that's still cultivating the practice, but it's doing it in a space that still accommodates the change that has happened in your life. And I think that is something that we're missing in the West, because we're so busy. We're busy, busy, busy. And yet we're still empty because we're not filling the busyness with that support that this practice can offer. And sometimes what it'll do is it'll knock us off the busy running wheel and realize that maybe I don't need to be so busy. But you're not going to realize that unless you've been cultivating yourself. Maybe sometimes someone's lucky and they're like, realize, oh my God, I'm so busy and my life has just gone off the rails. I need to like quit my job and just spend time quiet. Some people can do that, but most people, they can't do that. And so then they think, oh, well, I can't do any kind of practice because I don't have time. I literally don't have time to sit and meditate. And I've even encountered this with people recently, and my solution, this is before I really knew that I was teaching Pure Land, was to do chanting in your car on your way to work, do chanting in your car on the way back. And people that I've talked to about doing that said that it actually was more beneficial than when they were doing just sitting, because just sitting was 20 minutes a day. Chanting while driving was like 45 minutes to an hour a day. And they were getting more kind of waking up in them from doing that than when they were going, oh, well, I'm going to sit for 20 minutes, which is wonderful. But if you can't do that anymore, it doesn't mean, oh, that's it, I can't do it. And here's proof, doing the chanting also helps. Yeah, Chris, did you have a question?
Yeah, I wanted to offer one of the things. You and I were chanting on Tuesday mornings, and then we stopped doing that. So what I incorporated in is doing the thousand eyes and ears, how many there or whatever they are.
Hands and eyes.
Korean. YouTube, videos playing as I'm driving. And I don't have the words available to me, but still it's beneficial. It's still a chanting practice. And I also think like any other chanting, whether it's like a particular goddess or god, or doing the rosary, or any prayer beads of any sort, that's the kind of thing what we're talking about, right?
Yeah, and it's you can do it. You can do the practice and do it half-heartedly, and it'll help a little, probably not so much. But this is the distinction with Pure Land. Regardless of whether it's Buddhism or Christianity or anything, it's the devotional aspect that is important, because the recitation of the whatever the chant or mantra is the thing that we use to focus our mind. And this is where it's the idea of this one point mind, that it's fixed. It's the tool that we use to keep our mind from wandering. The key in that is to then also, while you're doing that, fill your heart with the compassion, with the love of the practice. So, if you're a Christian and you're reciting the rosary, you fill your heart with the Virgin Mary, or if you're Islamic, you fill your heart with, the love of Allah. It's the two parts that come together. That's the whole of the practice. And it's what we do on Sundays. What we aim to do is, when we come together on our Sundays and we chant, is that we're not just these hollow things that are just like spouting out the words. We're using the chant to focus our mind while we hollow out our inside so that it can be filled with the love and compassion that all of these things are meant to cultivate in us. And that's why the Sangha is so important, because we need that space to be able to do that. Like what Anne pointed out at the very beginning, that it's this place of safety. It's this refuge that we go to so that we can hollow ourselves out so that it can be filled with all of the stuff that our practice is meant to give rise in us. So I think that, you know, one of the things that we, if we really want to help other people in the world, is this limitation that Western Buddhism has been kind of obsessed with over the last, you know, half century at least, which is this thing of just sit, just sit, just sit, clear your mind, just sit. And for people who have the space to do that, wonderful. But there's a lot of us who just, we're not there yet, or we may not ever be there. And we're doing a disservice to the people who are struggling in this world if we don't offer them something that they can use to cultivate themselves and, you know, free themselves from suffering. And this is, you know, upaya. It's, you know, the skillful means that we use to help people where they are. Not, well, you need to cut back on your hours and, you know, do a 3-day retreat and get your life back in order. Well, you know, some people can do that. A lot of people can't.
We're busy bodhisattvas.
Yeah.
This middle path ain't for sissies.
But see, the thing is that, you know, even as a teacher, sometimes I can clearly see the person that, you know, they are cultivating a lifestyle that does not benefit them. But upaya means, you know, you can't just go, you need to quit that job and find a job that's better for you and, you know, yourself and your family or whatever. I can't do that because, you know, most people are just going to be like, you know, how dare you tell me what to do? Or, you know, that's just impossible for me to even possibly consider. And so what ends up happening is that it's just sort of like, oh, okay, well, we got to find somebody else who I can teach practice to. And so that person misses out on the potential that if they were to start doing this kind of practice, it could very well open them up to seeing their situation and going, oh, you know what, this is not the right job for me. I need to quit this job and find one that's better. You know, maybe they don't realize that, or maybe they realize that, you know, this is the job I'm stuck with, but I'm cultivating myself, and this is what gives me freedom in that. You know, does that make sense? Am I making sense?
Those two worlds exist together. Again.
Exactly. Yeah, and I think in the West, we've done a disservice with this emphasis on, you know, here's what Buddhism looks like, and you've got to like get it all in here. And if you can't fit in here, then, you know, oh well. And I don't like that, because it's not true. And here we are, and I'll tell you, probably a huge portion of these people who are practicing Buddhism and think that, you know, if you don't go through these hurdles, you really can't do it, are actually practicing elements of Pure Land practice. And while they're at the same time dismissing Pure Land practice as, you know, superstitious, old-fashioned, you know, it's, you know, fantasy and all this kind of stuff. And yet they're actually doing it and they don't even realize it. We've been doing it since the beginning of my starting our group. we've been doing Pure Land practice. I just didn't know that that's what we were doing until I started learning about these chants that we were doing. And then, you know, I took that course that had the book that Thich Nhat Hanh wrote. And I think if we want to really build the Sangha that is the Pure Land right here, right now, we have to make room for that practice so that other people could feel welcome. And that means also that if they come here and they want to do their recitation and their daily, you know, recollection of the Virgin Mary, I am all for it. Do it. Do it. We still welcome you here, you know, because it's all the same thing. It may wear a different dress or wear a dress and not a robe, you know, and it's still the same thing. If we are doing it with dedication and sincerity, that's the thing. You know, we can't just go, well, if I just recite this 100,000 times, then I will get all the things I want in my life, which people do, you know, and that's why a lot of people in Asia, the younger people, poo-poo the younger people, because a lot of older people practice it that way, you know, that it's like wish fulfillment. If I do all these things, I'll get all this stuff. But they don't have it in their heart. Some do, I know some do. But there are also a lot of people, you know, in the West who go to church and do the same thing. You know, if I just pray to God, I'll get, you know, all the stuff. And it's like, well, if you pray, fix your mind on the prayer, fill your heart with the love, then you'll get everything you want and need. It just may not be what you think it is when you get it. But when you're open that way, you'll be receptive to what it is because you'll know that's exactly what you asked for. You know, that's the difference versus the people who go, if I just pray, then I'll get this thing I want. And then they get the thing and they're like, but that's not what I wanted. I wanted something shinier. I wanted something, you know, more, you know, fancy, right? And so that's somebody who's doing it but not filling their heart with it. So that's what I really want Lotus Heart Zen to start cultivating, is this idea that we have room for all the different ways that you need to connect to this heart. And we don't have to look at, well, if I don't do, you know, a half hour of meditation every day, because I'd rather be doing mantra recitation or visualizing of, you know, Hecate, and, you know, cultivate these qualities, then, oh, well, you know, that's not real. What do you think?
I like it.
Good plan.
So I think that next Thursday we can meet to continue exploring the sutra. I only say that I have to wait until I'm going down to New York on Saturday to get my sister and my nephew. And so I'm gonna have to kind of see how things are organized to figure out, you know, where and when, because I think, I can't remember if Thursday is the night that my sister works late or if that's the day she gets done early. So because when she's doing her therapy sessions, I'm going to be helping take care of Malcolm because it's not going to be conducive to having online therapy with a 3.5-year-old who's like, as soon as she's occupied with something, is like, mom, you know, and when she's not occupied, he's like, go away. So I'm planning on meeting on Sunday, but I have to play it by ear, just depending on how late we get back. I'm going to be leaving early in the morning on Saturday and then drive right back up. So that'll be like, 12 hours.
Yeah.
And it's possible that I will not be functional Sunday morning. So just keep that in mind. And then I'll figure out my schedule. And are you all willing to continue this discussion?
Oh,
Yeah.
yes. Yeah.
Yes. Great.
That could help you out on Sunday if you want me to lead or something like that.
Oh, okay. Yeah. If you're comfortable with that, would be great.
Yeah, I think so. I think all of us together can figure it out.
I'm just thinking, I think that if you sign into, well, I'll have to check. I'm wondering if you just go into the link.
Well, I have a Zoom account, so I
you
can
do?
start
Okay,
my own.
so,
Yeah.
if it comes down to that, it's possible also what I could just do is just get it started. And if I'm not, functional enough to stay, then I'll just leave it on. And then
You can set up a Zoom link and just send it to us. We'll all click into it.
well, it's already there every Sunday.
Yeah.
I have the same
It's the
one.
same. It's the same
It's
one.
just a matter of, I think I have to start it to get it so that everybody
Oh.
can get in.
Mhm. There's a setting in Zoom that you can pick so you don't have to be the first one in the room.
Oh, okay. I'll look to see if that's set. Because then if whoever's first signs in, then could be the host.
Mhm.
Then we're all set. I'll just check and see if that's set that way. I know like some of the ones for tonight. Well, no. Oh yeah, no, I did. I had to let you in. Yeah. It's like I got a little thing saying you're signing in, and then I had to click it, and then it's like click. It says admit, and see, I'm in control of your access. I get to admit or go. You know what?
Are you in control? I don't know.
I'm not gonna let you in. No, I love your questions, Anne. So I'll always let you in.
Thank you.
Me too.
So I put the whole sutra a link to the website, so you can download it and you can read the whole thing, and then if you get a chance, read it before next week, and then we can explore it some more.
Cool.
There's 10 parts and we're halfway through, so. Okay.
Is there
Okay.
anything planned for tomorrow?
Tomorrow,
Yeah.
Friday? No.
No. Okay.
I couldn't do it because I'm actually having a fun experience of playing a role-playing game with all of my friends in Vermont that I used to play with.
Oh, cool.
Oh, wow. Good for
They're
you.
all home. They're all stuck at home, and so they contacted me and said, "We're going to do this. Do you want to do it?" So,
What's the game?
some game that my friend made up.
Oh, cool.
Oh.
That's what he did. In fact, one of the games that we played, he actually wrote into a novel.
Really?
Wow.
So maybe he's doing it again because it's
Cool.
another one that he created. So,
Marty might be interested in hearing more about that.
well, I'm really interested too because I want to get back into playing the role-playing game because I think I told you, Jane, but I want to create a role-playing game where it's nonviolent, where the encounters you have and stuff are meant to you need to get out of them without violence.
So it's kind of like a practice to learn how to do that?
Yeah, but it's in, the way that the Buddha did it, where it's like a fantasy world. So it feels
Yeah.
like you're having fun while you're learning how to engage in nonviolent practice. That's my idea.
Wow.
Like the games we played, similar, like we have to depend on each other to bring we bring each all up as a group to win.
Yeah. Except this is where, you have a character and you play the character and you get put into these situations, and all the different people who are playing the characters have to work together to resolve the thing. But in this case, I think all of the role-playing games, it's all, I got this fighting skill and these magic spells and all this stuff to defeat the enemy. This would be, how do you do that but with nonviolent techniques, which requires me getting back into how the game is played so I can figure out how to revamp the system, because I can't just create a nonviolent system because I haven't played in, gosh, it's got to be like, when was the last time we played? It was in 2000.
Wow.
20 years ago? That doesn't even seem possible.
Time flies.
I can't believe it. Oh my God. Wow. I was saying we met last weekend just to kind of get started. And I said, it's like, one good thing about a pandemic is it got us all together again.
Yeah. Well, have fun.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to it, which is nice, because after that, my life's going to get very challenging.
Yeah, yes, it is.
Yes. You'll have another opportunity to practice.
A lot. Yeah. It'll be both wonderful and challenging.
Yes.
I just
Good.
love where he is in his life right now. Such a fascinating age, and he's very, very smart, like very curious. And so I learn a lot from his view of the world, but I don't have the same energy level.
Nobody does.
Nobody does.
Maybe I'll find a way to suck it out. I don't know, but I just, my sister is, a bodhisattva, and just being a single mom of that and working every day with people who are, suffering and in trauma, and, helping them through that, and, doing that all by yourself.
Mm.
So, wanted to help as much as I could, because I knew it's getting harder for her being there, and every day she doesn't know if the daycare is going to close.
Yeah.
So, all right. Well, thank you so much. This was great. I loved this discussion, and I look forward to some more of it. And hopefully I'll get to see you all Sunday.
Well, thank you.
Have a safe trip.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you for the teaching.
Don't put it online, because my sister and I are not telling my mother that they're going to be here, because we're going to wait 2 weeks before we say anything.
2 weeks?
Yeah. Because if my mom
I'm going to be so mad at you.
Oh, I know, but you know what? We'd rather them be mad at us than dead. Because if she knew, then she would be like trying to break the door down to get in.
Sure, absolutely, yeah, that's reasonable.
Or if she knew and she was trying really hard not to, the 2 weeks would be hell for her. So we're going to do everything we possibly can to make sure that she doesn't know until 14 days.
That's kinder.
So remember when she calls your sister to put the dog someplace so she doesn't hear them bark.
Oh,
That's a good point. Yeah, we'll have to be tricky.
Yes.
We'll tap back into our earlier days when we were plotting together many different things.
Oh, I'm sure it'll be easy to get right back there.
You're right. All right, take care, everybody. Have a good night. and be well. And thank you all
you.
who followed us on Facebook. I hope you enjoyed learning about Pure Land Buddhism.